Hi, welcome to Surviving Life Today. I am your host, Kelly McFarland. At the Surviving Life Today podcast, we focus on how we are all surviving life today. I'm Kelly McFarland. I am a researcher, farmer, baker. I am an applied anthropologist who specializes in food. And my special interest, the main focus of what I look at, is food systems. I study both the U.S. industrial food system and the local food economy here in North Texas. This chat specifically is geared at how do we break systems in order to repair them? And so, how do we build a better future? I want to start out by talking about today in the United States, we have a war with Iran. The United States and Israel created a war of choice, and many of the people who are in the fallout are kind of just in shock and they don't really know what to do. They don't know which way to go. This talk in particular, talking about how to break systems in order to repair them, the systems are breaking and we are witnessing it. I am very upset about everything that I'm seeing in the world today. I'm sure I am one of many people who are very upset about it. I do not agree with sending our friends and loved ones to fight and to put them in harm's way. I do not agree with many of the things that are happening right now. And I have many people contacting me all the time talking about how do we fix this and move forward. So my studies in particular into the food system inform on this a lot. And so that's the reason for making this video. That's the reason for this YouTube channel, really. And so my focus before all of this happened was about the U.S. industrial food system and the loss of food sovereignty that is felt by lower and middle class people. The main, like when I originally went into anthropology and I originally started learning about all of this, my main focus was access to nutritious food. I believe that there would be some easy answer to help lower and middle income people access nutritious food. Now, neurodivergence and a willingness to go down the rabbit holes that I found just everywhere led to a studying of the food system completely, right? Because it is a system, and is a system that restricts people from having options. And it is a system that, not on purpose, I would say, but on impact, has been designed in this manner. So what we're seeing today around us in many ways, it's not just the food system that I'm going to talk about, because all the systems today that are around us are becoming vertically integrated. And what I mean by that, vertical integration means that every step of the process is being run by one source. Okay? So in the food system, like let's talk about chicken farming, right? Every step of that process is run by the company, the brand in charge of the chickens. The farmers that get the chickens to raise them, they get from the company that's the brand that sells them. They have to maintain those chickens in standards as dictated by those companies. And some of those companies have regulations even against warehouses having windows, so that people cannot see the manner in which those chickens are raised. Okay, there's a lot of crazy regulations here, which have reasoning of, oh, well, that's OSHA because we don't know if there's a storm, if those windows will hurt the chickens in the end, right? So it's a creative way of going around the rules of the system. But the vertical integration in the system protects the one brand at the core, okay? It's not just the food system, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the food system is my main study, my main area where I'm looking at. These systems have all been integrated by the billionaires, right? To the point where there is so much monopoly in the system that the system itself is failing. And there's no way that normal people have the options to create change. So my study, where I focus my interest, is Where is there a lack of option for change? And how can we create the opportunity to create an option for change, right? So even below that whole like, oh, well, I can choose between this and this, how do we open that door back up to have more opportunities for growth? So first of all, in order to understand a lot of what I'm talking about with where we're at in the United States is understanding where we are in the stages of late stage capitalism, which I have already posted a talk on neoliberalism that I will link below. We are in a place where we have capitalism that's dying, that's not working, that the growth is not working. And we have an out of control ruling class that is making choices that we do not agree with, by and large, on the floor, on the ground, where everybody's living their day-to-day lives. These people do not agree with the choices that are made by the ruling class. And we do not know how to take back control. This is not to talk about politically. I think, okay, so sorry. There's a little bit of politics in this because eventually I'm going to talk about legislation. But if you want to think about what's happening right now with the war in Iran, or with ICE and DPS terrorizing communities, or with the Epstein files and the awful, horrendous crimes that were committed by many people who are not being held accountable, that is other people. I don't know about that. Okay, so I can talk about why I'm mad about it. I could talk your ear off about why I'm mad about it. My husband could pretty much tell you. But I don't have advice there. I would recommend Heather Cox Richardson or Dr. Joan Freeman. Those are the two main historians that I watch that kind of give me an idea of how to understand what we are going through. Highly recommend them. There's many other influencers that you can follow for day-to-day news and things like that. That's not what this is about. This is about how is the system working and how can we take these next steps to start making real change. We are watching systems fall apart before our eyes, and the despair that so many people are feeling because these are the systems that our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors built to protect us. Okay? The founding fathers, civil rights leaders, all of that. Just so you know, the Black Panther Party started for food. It started to bring food to the communities who were being left out of access to nutritious foods. So all of these systems, and yes, it touches on politics, but we need to think about how did we get here and how do we get out of here? So my advice is centered around how do we build local economies and how do we create change that can lead to bigger change, right? So how do we start that snowball that creates an avalanche? Okay, so the next step for Loaf and Leaf is to begin with a grocer, with a distributor type situation where I can work with local food farmers to help them sell their foods, but also to determine how to create contracts that protect everybody. With that, working with people in the local economy and working with state, health, university, all of these different bigger entities that have guidelines that have you have to do this and you can't do that, right? But they don't have a system that helps you to do that. They don't have contracts that you can go and use that template in order to do what you need to do, that tell you every step of the way, this is what you have to make sure that you are doing in order to be protected. So my idea with Loaf and Leaf and creating a brick and mortar is to create those contracts, is to find a way that I can ensure that the local food farmers that are selling to me, that I am selling as a grocer to the outside world, are protected, that I'm protected and that they're protected, and that the consumer is aware that they are purchasing from the local food system. Once we can create those contracts and this system of growth to have a local food farmer sell to a grocer that is selling to a consumer, we can start legislating change. Legislating change is the way that a local consumer economy can dictate how grocery stores, how any entity can operate within their limits. Okay? So creating change, meaning legislating that grocers that are in this area have to carry X% of local food. If they cannot access that local food, have a pathway for them to say, I have tried X, Y, and Z in order to carry local food and I couldn't, so I don't have to do that for this year, for this second, okay? And have a pathway to growth. As you say, every grocer in the area has to have 5% local food. Once you meet that, make it 10, make it 15, make it 20. Once we have contracts in place that will protect the local producer, and once we have a system of growing local food in the grocer, then we can start to legislate change. What gives us the right to legislate this change? Climate, health, nutrition, access, all of the standards, okay? Read the food bill. We are supposed to have access to a nutritious diet. That is not being provided to us. That is not being provided to us from the government. That is not being provided to us through these capitalistic entities that are focusing on selling food over providing nutrition. So we have to legislate change. This makes sense. I know it makes sense. And not only that, these are common sense changes. Why are we wasting so much energy? Why are we wasting gas? Why are we wasting the fertilizer to transport food for trade when we could just grow it here? That makes no sense. It only makes sense if you're the billionaire in charge who wants to make sure you can meet your bottom dollar. It does not make sense to the local consumer population. Okay, so we have to start to think as a population, start to strategically consider, how can we take back control? How can we take back control? And this is a pathway to taking back control. Not just providing grocered items, not just working with local food farmers, but creating a precedent where we have contracts for protection, where we have worked with the state and local governments, where we know that we are doing this in the correct manner, and then creating a template for that and proliferating it bigger, and then creating legislation to create the change in the law. Now, a big part of this legislation, which I think we have seen happen many times recently, but I will use Denton, the city, the county of Denton, and their law against fracking as my example here. We have seen legislation where city and local entities have legislated to protect themselves, right? So in the Denton County, they passed a law saying no fracking. We do not want fracking here. And then we saw the state of Texas say, yes, we do. And the state did away with the local law to protect the local people because the state wanted to provide fracking to the billionaires in charge. Okay? So now we need to think a little bit better about how to make these laws. And I took, this is, again, I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I don't write laws, but I do read the news, and I am an anthropologist who very much pays attention to everything that's happening. And so taking kind of a cue from a judge who has repeatedly ordered the Department of Homeland Security to release people who are doing nothing wrong, that should not be held in custody, and is met with constant pushback, we don't know how to do that, we don't know how to find them, we can't do that. Well, the judge decided to write into his verdict that these people need to be set free, and if you do not do that, then every day you will be charged X amount of dollars for not doing it until these people are set free. I don't know what happened after that, but I would imagine they took 3 steps back and went, oh, hey, look, these people are hiding behind the door and we'll set them free now, right? It's very easy to realize that this is intentional incompetence not to follow the law. So, with what I'm saying in mind, with the idea of legislating change and saying once we have contracts in place to protect local farmers, starting to require groceries to carry those farmers, there has to be teeth. All of these laws that we pass have to have teeth in form of a financial penalty. So we would legislate change in saying that a grocer in the zip code that we're legislating the change, right, has to carry, let's say, 5% to start of local food. If they do not do that, if they do not participate, they will get 5% charged to their yearly profits that will go to the city so that the city can take care of the health of their citizens. Okay, so now we're starting to see how we can make system change by making these entities that are getting away with really doing great amount of damage, but we don't have any power to keep them out. Thinking about this, think about the data centers. Think about the ice warehouses. Think about all of these places that are trying to legislate to keep these entities out that are being steamrolled by the state and federal government. Instead of legislating just to keep them out, legislate a financial penalty if you cannot. Okay? When Denton passed the law for no fracking. And let me tell you, this was a long time ago, and I had like this kind of idea of putting teeth with a law was not even in my wheelhouse of consideration. But when I think about how Denton passed the law for no fracking and how the state government came in and said, oh, yes, you can, right? What they should have done is said, no fracking. However, in a situation where a government entity that is larger than us says that we have to permit it, fracking is only allowed with X amount of dollars and all of these penalties that will go to the health and the support of the people. That is the whole purpose here, right? So with the data centers taking your water and taking your energy, legislate that you do not allow data centers. And if they try to put one in, they have to pay this amount for the water and this amount for the energy. And make it 3 to 4 times as much as you think it is. Make it so much money that it is not worth it to them to destroy your community. And that's what we need to start doing just across the board. We need to start charging them for our services. They are taking our drinking water, they are taking our land, and they are putting things on them that are destroying everything for everyone. And we have to do something about it. And this is the only way that I've thought of so far that there is a pathway to make change. So in the consideration of the update for what I will be doing with Loaf and Leaf and Locally Yours, with my own brick and mortar entity, this is a way to stop federal control of the local economy through building change from the ground up. This requires grocers to make the change, but the grocers, how they're going to go about finding local producers and all that, that's not written into this. And so it has that opening for lies, right? I know that in farmers markets, and I don't want to bust farmers markets, so let me kind of stop here and say that farmers markets are extremely important for community building, and they're extremely important for people knowing who their farmers are. And I think that the proliferation of them around here is a really good thing. We've seen a lot of growth in farmers markets in the local economy. However, farmers markets have a problem with resellers. Resellers are people who purchase industrial food by the pallet and sell it into local food like they have grown it themselves. So they charge a lot more money for a lot lower quality food. And this is everywhere. You can actually just Google resellers and local food, and I'm sure you'll pull up many articles. As I was doing my research, I found many instances of resellers in the North Texas area and across the nation. Resellers are a thing that happen almost everywhere you see farmers markets. There's also the problem that farmers markets kind of create this idea of a romanticized past where people are like, well, I'm buying from the farmers market and I'm doing my part. But they don't see the added strain, that they're putting on farmers just to have to sell it at farmers market. A farmer has to grow their product, even a local cottage food producer has to create their product, right? So they're working full time. If it's like, let's say a cottage bakery, they're working full time to bake all those goods. Or a farmer, they're working full time to raise all their products. Then they have to take a day out of their work to go stand somewhere and sell it. That is along the lines of a second-class food seller. Other food sellers will produce their food and then they sell it to the distributor, and the distributor sells it to the grocers and everything like that, which there's a bottleneck, which there's a problem. But one of the main problems for local food is that we don't have distributors. We don't have the middleman that creates this option for farmers to focus on farming, for bakers to focus on baking, and for food to be sold. And so a part of this is creating that. Another thing that we were missing in the local food system is butchers. There are 4 industrial butchers for the entire nation. There's 4 brands that butcher all the food that is sold in grocers. When I was doing all of my research with local food farmers, I actually did encounter a farmer who raised chickens, who was considering selling chickens into industrial food. And his stop was the contracts. I met some beef farmers, and these beef farmers sold meat into industrial food. The reason they stopped is because the way the contracts work for the local food farmers, the ranchers, the people who are growing meat, is if they sell their meat directly into the grocer economy, they are personally responsible for any problems that happen with the butcher. So this local food farmer who sells meat, if there's a bone in that meat and somebody accidentally bites on it and they hurt their mouth, that local farmer is responsible for that happening. We don't have any butchers. And that is a huge bottleneck problem in the local food economy. I, as Loaf and Leaf and as an applied anthropologist who specializes in food, I would love to work with the state health department, and with local universities to build a butcher program where we train and certify butchers to be able to butcher local food to be sold into grocers. Not only do I know a lot of farmers who are looking for butchers who can do this, but I know a lot of people who would be interested in becoming butchers if this training program was made available. Okay, so this is another pathway to grow the system extremely, and that would create a great amount of change. Going from that, another system, so I've talked a lot now about the local food system, but there are a few other systems that kind of touch on food that I also see vertically integrating that we should be alarmed by. One of those is doctors, medical clinics, insurance companies, and pharmacies. There was recently a meeting on Capitol Hill of all of the big pharma people, all of the big medical companies, and they were talking about vertical integration, exactly what I'm talking about with the food system. And they were talking about how you can see a doctor, and that doctor works for that insurance company, and that doctor will say, oh, you have this problem, let me prescribe you this medication. And the medication is carried by their pharmacy and they get a kickback off of that. And the medical center is the only place where you could fill that pharmacy RX prescription, right? So this vertical integration makes it so that when people go to the doctor about having the sniffles, they don't know if what the doctor says is wrong with them is really what's wrong with them and they're helping them because of their health, or what's wrong with them is what will sell more pills for that pharmacy to make more money. This is a big problem. Vertical integration is a big problem when it comes to fields that are centered around health, that are centered around nutrition, that are centered around the idea where people need to survive. Capitalism doesn't really do well with the idea that people need to survive. Capitalism does well with people need to make money. So we have to ask ourselves, are these systems that are guided by capitalism, are they doing what they should do? Should food and health be guided by that? Or should it be guided by health? Should food be guided by nutrition? and access. How do we make the change in order to make this happen? And a large part of this video is to talk about how that change can occur. So why does the change need to happen in the food system? Why is it a bad idea for food to rely on capitalism? Well, food relying on capitalism is not just about the fact that the food that they're selling is probably not healthy. It's not just the fact that in order to grow that food, there's a lot of pesticides putting on it, and so you're probably ingesting pesticide. It's not just the fact that we don't know what the fallout will be from ingesting those pesticides, but there's been a considerable amount of lawsuits about cancer. It's not just the fact that GMOs are being created to help plants withstand a greater amount of pesticides being put on them so that the more food can be grown. But this is also about food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is ownership. Food sovereignty is a pathway to make change. It is about creating options. It's about us being in charge of what we put in our bodies. So, when we think about late stage capitalism and the food system and how to repair the system in order to move forward, we really need to think about the structure of the system altogether and how we can redirect the food system not to rely so much on capitalism, but to rely on health. How do we create change that says, if you have a healthy population, this is how you have success? How do we do that? A big part of this is options. Options are so important in order to grow. We need independent ownership, and we need to get away from the consolidation of monopolies. The consolidation, the billionaires who don't care if you're eating or not, consolidating the food system so that they can survive easier. Another system that I was thinking about with this is the transportation system. And this is just kind of wrapping up, thinking about another place where we have consolidation, where we need to see a great amount of change. The transportation system is kind of funny because it's supposed to be from the federal government. They have public roadways that we can use. But what we're seeing a lot of in the North Texas area, and I don't know about anywhere else, is the creation of toll roads. Toll roads are actually financed a lot of the time from entities that aren't even in the United States. And why they finance it is so that they can get the tolls once it's built. Okay, so right there, we have an entire industry built around something that we have no control over. The railways in the United States have been privatized. So in essence, the rail that you're driving the car on is owned by a private company. The rail cars themselves are owned by different companies. There's BNSF, Burlington Northern Santa Fe. There's Amtrak that moves people. There's also in North Texas, there's DART that also moves people. In Dallas, there's a city rail. What we don't see in North Texas is a rail like Amtrak that is reliable, that is consistent, that moves people in the way that we need to be moved. We see an explosion of the population, but we don't have any way, like if you live in far North Texas, if you want to go to Dallas or Fort Worth, you have to drive a car. If there is an entrepreneur out there who wants to make, I would say, pretty good money, if you can devise a way to have rail cars that will transport people from far North Texas, like the Gainesville area, to Fort Worth and Dallas, Texas, and even as far as Waco, if you could hammer out how to use those railways to transport people, you'd be a billionaire. You'd be a billionaire. There are so many times where this has gone to vote. There are so many times where people want this to happen. And not only that, but there are such congested roadways. And there's congested roadways in the form of toll roads that are taking our tolls and they're going outside of the United States. This is an area where we have seen extreme vertical integration in a large way, because I don't know if people realize that those railways are privately owned. Do we need this railway? Well, in New York, they have rail. In LA, I think they have rail. We are now the third largest population in the United States. North Texas is larger than Houston now. We don't have access to water up here. We are the only landlocked population that has this. We need rail. We need transportation for our people. And if the person who can do that can do it, they're going to make millions of dollars. Okay, so this is another area that we can break and repair the system. So in this chat, I've talked a lot about late stage capitalism and how this complete vertical integration has really opened up the opportunity for local entrepreneurship. Yes, there are rules around being able to be an entrepreneur in these larger systems. However, we are starting to really figure out on the ground level how these rules about entry really have to do with contracts. They really have to do with us agreeing with each other that this is the way we're going to do this, and then we can proceed. So it is not this magical place where industrial entities know how to do it and nobody else does. In fact, I will say when I worked in industrial food recently, I worked at an industrial baker, and the standards that industrial entities maintain are actually less than the standards that independent producers maintain. And this could be because independent producers feel personally accountable, so they're more worried that it could blow back on them. Or it could mean that big corporations create really easy guidelines to follow things, and it's just not technical enough for people to realize that this needs to be more pointed. But either way, this is really just a contract state. This is a consumer state where we can make change, and we need to. We need to take back power. We need to figure out how to change these systems in a way that the system itself is no longer recognizable. In a way where the system itself is centered around a bottom-up approach where the people determine the system. And this is actually a great point in time to be making this change because we are actively seeing the destruction of systems around us. We are seeing systems fail. We are seeing everyone say, oh, I don't know what to do. What will I do about this? And so right now is a great time to say, I know what I can do. I know what we can do. And let's build a bigger change for the future. So ideas for next steps. How, if you're interested in also pursuing this bottom-up approach to making change, how can you create an idea and start to build it? Well, my first thing is to say, work with colleges. Many colleges are research universities. Research universities have students who have to add to the wealth of knowledge through their research in order to attain their degree. That means they want to work with outside people who have these ideas so that they can determine how would they do that so that they can get their degree. This is a perfect part for you to use this knowledge to help attain change. Another suggestion is to work with agricultural extension offices or business development centers. Okay? If you are interested in starting a farm, if you're interested in changing how your farm produces, if you're interested in many of these different ideas in food, the agriculture extension offices are great for knowing what the rules are. They can quickly tell you, oh, the guidelines say you have to do it this way. The same with business development offices. Not only do business development offices have that understanding of what the rules are, but they also know areas that are rapidly growing that they can point you to. So while we are watching the destruction of these systems, right now we can strategically design a way to move forward. Local food in groceries would be a huge change. This would be a change that would not only change our access to healthy, nutritious, fresh food, but it puts more producers in the local economy to grow our economy and make us all more wealthy. In the end, we know the people who are in control, who are really driving the bus right now for the United States of America, aren't even considering these problems. These aren't even considerations on their map. They are truly focused on other things that really we have no say-so over, and we need to be protesting loudly. So right now, I kind of feel like I'm just one person with a flashlight in the dark, but I also feel like my flashlight might be helping to lead us to a generator and a box of bulbs, right? So maybe this idea can help to start making real change in systems so that we can start taking back control of where we're at. I do want to say that there are other food entities that are doing a lot to make change. There's FARFA, which is the Farmer and Rancher Freedom Alliance. They are doing great things politically for food. There is a national food tank that I am a member of that has meetings with bigger entities that talk about how we can take direction in food. And there's the people who are making the Dallas food plan. Dallas itself is starting to get really organized around farming and food, and it is a beautiful thing to see. So if you're a food producer who's interested in these sources to follow, I definitely recommend all three of those. But for now, I believe that's all I had to talk about with how we can break systems in order to repair them. I do think that the systems that I'm talking about and the repair that I'm talking about is more of like break the system and don't fail, right? And then build a different system and go to that one. So they will be based on the idea of capitalism, based on the idea of a community, and based on the idea of United States needs. But the systems that we need do not need to be developed in the same manner as the systems that are in place today. So I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope I didn't just ramble for all of 40 minutes. I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you're hanging in there. I know that the world is a crazy place right now. So until next time, whatever you're doing out there in life, I hope that you survive and thrive in all that you do. Take care.